I needed $3,500 to keep from losing my eyesight. My son had just spent more than $500,000 on a vacation home. So I believed asking him for a 2-week loan would be simple. I was wrong. "We just closed on the lake house, Dad," Brian said. "We can't spare a dime." Before I could answer, his wife took the phone from him. "Stop asking my husband to solve your problems, Walter." Then the line went dead. I remained at my kitchen table with the phone pressed against my ear. The surgical estimate lay beneath my other hand. The numbers on the page drifted in and out of focus. $3,500. That was the price of protecting what remained of my vision. Apparently, it was also the price of discovering what I was worth to my own son. 3 days later, Brian would be pounding on my front door so hard that Margaret's picture shook against the wall. He would be holding legal papers in both hands. He would be begging me to reverse a decision he never imagined I possessed the courage to make. But on that cold afternoon, I knew nothing about amended trusts, new medical directives, or the $1 million estate Margaret and I had quietly built. I knew only that my eyesight was fading. My wife was gone. And the son I had carried through every crisis of his life had decided that helping me through mine would be inconvenient. My name is Walter Bennett. I was 68 years old and living alone in the same brick ranch house outside Dayton, Ohio, where Margaret and I had raised our family. The house was not large. It had 3 bedrooms, 1 narrow hallway, a basement that smelled faintly of concrete after heavy rain, and kitchen cabinets Margaret had wanted to replace for 15 years. We never replaced them. Something else always seemed more important. College tuition. A broken furnace. A child needing help. A funeral. A medical bill. Life has a way of spending your money before you decide what to do with it. For nearly 40 years, I worked as a union electrician. I climbed extension ladders during Ohio winters when the metal was so cold it burned through my gloves. I crawled through commercial attics in August while sweat soaked my shirt before 8 in the morning. I pulled cable through hospitals, schools, factories, and office buildings. I spent countless nights eating sandwiches from a dented metal lunchbox beneath temporary work lights. I had always trusted my hands. They were scarred, stiff, and slower than they once had been. But they still remembered how to repair almost anything. That made it especially difficult to admit that I could no longer trust my eyes. The changes began gradually. Streetlights developed cloudy rings around them. Headlights stretched into long white smears. The numbers on the microwave appeared to melt into one another. One morning, I poured coffee beside my mug instead of into it. I stood there watching the dark liquid spread across the counter before understanding what I had done. I laughed at myself. Then I cleaned it up and said nothing to anyone. I stopped driving at night. When Brian asked why I always scheduled visits before sunset, I told him I preferred being home in the evening. I began counting the 7 steps between my bedroom and the bathroom. At night, I kept one hand against the hallway wall so I would not collide with the small wooden table Margaret had bought at an estate sale. The table was ugly. I had told her that the day she brought it home. She said I had no taste. For 32 years, the table remained exactly where she placed it. After her death, I could not bring myself to move it. Even when I could barely see it. The most painful change involved the photograph above the fireplace. It had been taken during our 35th wedding anniversary. Margaret wore a pale blue dress. Her silver hair curved softly around her face. The photographer told me to loosen up. I told him I had been trying for 35 years. Margaret laughed just as the camera flashed. That photograph captured her exactly as I remembered her. Warm. Patient. Amused by me. At first, I could still see the entire picture. Then Margaret's features began disappearing. I could see the outline of her dress. The shape of her hair. The bright patch where her face should have been. But her eyes were gone. Not really gone. Swallowed by the blur. I would stand in front of the fireplace trying to remember their exact color. They had been blue with a thin ring of gray. I knew that. But knowing and seeing are different things. And I was terrified that one day even the memory would begin to fade. I continued pretending nothing serious was happening until I nearly stepped in front of a moving grocery cart outside the Kroger on Wilmington Pike. The cart came from my left. I never saw it. A woman pulled it back just before it struck me. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm fine." "You walked directly in front of me." I wasn't paying attention. That was a lie. I had been paying careful attention. I simply could not see her. I drove home slowly, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. The following morning, I scheduled an appointment with an ophthalmologist. The doctor's office smelled of disinfectant, burnt coffee, and the faint plastic scent of medical equipment. A technician placed drops in my eyes and guided me through several scans. Bright lights flashed. Machines clicked. Letters appeared and disappeared. When the ophthalmologist returned, he rolled his chair closer and turned a monitor toward me. The screen displayed colored shapes I could not interpret. "There has been significant progression, Mr. Bennett." "What does that mean?" He explained the condition. Then he explained the procedure. It would be performed at an outpatient surgical center. There was a strong chance of protecting the vision I still had. Recovery would require patience. There were no guarantees. But doing nothing carried a serious risk. "How long can I wait?" The doctor paused. It was not a long pause. But when you are frightened, silence expands. "I would not postpone this, Mr. Bennett." "Are we talking about weeks or months?" "Weeks would be better." "And if I wait longer?" "You could lose more vision." "How much?" "I cannot predict that." He lowered his voice. "But what is lost may not be recoverable." After insurance, the surgical center required $3,500 before confirming the date. I had assets. The house was paid off. Margaret and I had retirement accounts. There was a modest investment portfolio and a small piece of land her father had left her. On paper, I was comfortable. But money tied up in retirement funds and property does not help when someone at a billing desk needs immediate payment. My emergency savings had taken several hits. Margaret's final months were expensive even with good insurance. Then the roof leaked above the back bedroom. Property taxes increased. I needed dental work I had postponed for too long. And 4 years earlier, Brian called after one of his business investments failed. "Dad, I'm in trouble." I still remembered the fear in his voice. "How much?" $28,000. "What happened?" "I trusted the wrong partner." "Does Vanessa know?" "No." I wired him the money the following morning. I did not ask him to sign a promissory note. I did not tell Margaret's sister. I did not mention it at Thanksgiving or use it to win an argument. My son was frightened. I possessed the ability to help. That was all I needed to know. He promised to repay me within a year. 4 years passed. I never asked. Not until I needed $3,500 to save my eyesight. I sat at the kitchen table with the surgical estimate beneath my hand and called him. Brian answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, Dad. Can I call you back? We're in the middle of something." Music played behind him. People were laughing. I heard glasses touch. "What are you celebrating?" "We closed on the lake place." His voice filled with pride. Brian and Vanessa had discussed buying a vacation home for more than a year. He sent photographs of properties with stone fireplaces, private boat docks, and kitchens larger than the apartment Margaret and I rented when we married. I had worried the purchase was excessive. Brian told me it was an investment. "Congratulations," I said. "Thanks. Vanessa is already planning the furniture." "That sounds nice." "It needs work, but the view is unbelievable." "I'm happy for you." I nearly ended the call. Asking for help was never easy for me. The numbers on the surgical paper shifted again. "Brian, I need to ask you something." His voice changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. "What's going on?" "I saw the eye doctor." "Is everything okay?" "No." I explained the diagnosis. I explained the surgery and the risk of waiting. Then I told him about the payment. "I'm not asking you to give it to me," I said. "I can move money from one of the accounts, but it may take 2 weeks. I need a short loan." The music continued in the background. Brian exhaled. "Dad, this is really bad timing. I know you just closed. The closing costs were higher than expected. There's furniture, repairs, association fees, insurance." "I understand. We're stretched thin." I looked around my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The old clock ticked above the doorway. Margaret's empty chair remained across from me. I wouldn't ask if it could wait. You always make things sound like emergencies. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. The doctor said I could lose more of my sight. Someone spoke near him. Vanessa. What does he want? Brian lowered his voice, but not enough. Money for some eye procedure. A moment later, Vanessa spoke directly through the telephone. Walter, we have children and 2 properties to pay for. I understand. You've been retired for years. You should have planned for medical expenses. I did plan. Clearly not well enough. Life cost more than the plan. She gave a short laugh. Not a kind laugh. The kind used to dismiss someone. Call the hospital and work something out. Stop asking my husband to clean up every problem. I waited. I waited for Brian to take back the telephone. I waited for him to say, "That is my father. Do not speak to him that way." Instead, I heard him in the background. "Vanessa, just hang up." Then the line went silent. I remained at the table with the phone against my ear. I was not angry at first. Anger would have been easier. Anger gives you heat. It gives you something to push against. What I felt was shame. At 68 years old, after spending my life repairing other people's problems, my own son had made me feel embarrassed for asking him to help protect my eyesight. My right hand rested on the table. A pale scar crossed my index finger. I received it during a warehouse renovation when Brian was 16. He wanted a set of golf clubs. All his friends had expensive equipment. Margaret said we could not afford it. I volunteered for 2 overnight shifts. Near dawn on the second night, a metal edge cut through my glove. The wound required 6 stitches. I hid the bandage beneath my work coat until I could surprise Brian with the clubs. He hugged me. Best dad in the world. Back then, I was proud that my son never had to feel poor. Sitting in my kitchen, I wondered whether protecting him from every hardship had taught him that sacrifice always flowed in one direction. From the parent. Toward the child. Forever. At 6:30 that evening, my doorbell rang. I turned on the porch light even though the sun had not fully set. Rachel stood outside wearing navy scrubs. Her dark hair was pulled back. She carried a paper grocery bag against her hip. She looked at me and frowned. "You look terrible." "Nice to see you, too. I brought soup." That improves the greeting. Rachel walked past me and entered the kitchen as naturally as though she still lived there. She placed the bag on the counter. Then she saw the medical papers. Rachel had been my daughter for more than 20 years. Not by blood. Not at first by law. But she had always possessed an ability to notice what people tried hardest to hide. She moved the estimate beneath the lamp. "Dad? It's nothing." She folded her arms. "What did the doctor say?" "I need a procedure." "When?" "Soon." "How soon?" I told her everything. The diagnosis. The risk. The $3,500. I also told her about the phone call. Rachel did not insult Brian. She did not call Vanessa cruel. She did not say I deserve better. She simply lifted the estimate and found the surgical center's telephone number. "What are you doing?" "Calling them tomorrow." "Why?" "To schedule your surgery." "I don't have the payment ready." "You do now." "Rachel." That was not a question. "You have a mortgage. And you have one set of eyes. You have student loans. I'm ahead on them. You need savings. I have savings. I cannot take your money." She reached into her purse. An envelope landed softly on the table. "Open that after I leave." "Rachel." "After I leave." "Why?" "Because otherwise you'll spend 20 minutes trying to hand it back." She hugged me. Then she picked up her keys and walked out before I could stop her. I opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for exactly $3,500. There was also a folded note. I moved closer to the lamp and read it slowly. "Dad. You never made me earn the right to be your daughter. You just kept showing up until I finally believed I was allowed to stay. Let me show up for you now. Love, Rachel." I pressed the note against the table because my hands had begun shaking. Brian shared my blood. Rachel shared my values. The check would help save my eyesight. But the contrast between the two calls had already changed the way I saw my family. I called Rachel before 7 the following morning. She answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you didn't try to drive anywhere." "Good morning to you, too. Did you open the envelope?" "Yes." "And?" "I can't take it." "You already did." "I haven't deposited it." "Then deposit it." "Rachel, you have a mortgage. So do millions of people. You're still paying for nursing school. I told you, I'm ahead. You need that money. You need your eyesight. I will pay you back. You can try." That sounds like a threat. It is. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed since the appointment. Then my voice became serious. "You don't owe me for raising you." Rachel became quiet. "Then Brian didn't owe you for raising him either." The words landed gently. That made them more powerful. "This is not payment," she continued. "It's what family does when someone is scared." "I'm not scared." "Yes, you are." I opened my mouth to argue. Nothing came. Rachel waited. She was right. I had been frightened in the doctor's office. Frightened outside the grocery store. Frightened every night while counting steps in the hallway. I was terrified of waking one morning unable to see the wall beside me. Men of my generation were not good at naming fear. We called it concern. We called it being cautious. We called it planning. We called it anything except what it was. Finally, I said, "I'm scared. I know. I don't want to become helpless." "You're not helpless because you need help. I spent my life taking care of people. Then you should understand why I need to take care of you." I looked toward Margaret's chair. "You sound like your mother." "I'll take that as a compliment." It was. Rachel had not always been confident enough to speak that directly. The first time Margaret brought her home, she was 17 and carried everything she owned inside a faded black backpack. Margaret met her through a church mentoring program in downtown Dayton. Rachel had entered foster care at 11. By 17, she had lived with enough families to stop calling any place home. She stood inside our entryway wearing a gray sweatshirt 2 sizes too large. Her eyes kept moving toward the front door. She seemed to be measuring the distance in case she needed to escape. Margaret showed her the spare bedroom. Fresh sheets. A second-hand dresser. Yellow curtains Margaret had sewn herself. Rachel placed the backpack beside the bed. She did not unpack it. Not that night. Not during the first week. She expected every home to be temporary. At dinner, Rachel barely spoke. She ate quickly. When she believed we were not watching, she slipped 2 dinner rolls into the pocket of her sweatshirt. I saw her. I did not say anything. Later, I left a plastic container of sandwiches inside the refrigerator. A note on top read: "For anyone who gets hungry." By morning, the sandwiches were gone. I replaced them. They disappeared again. For several weeks, Rachel kept emergency food beneath her bed. Margaret found crackers and canned fruit inside the dresser. She did not confront her. She simply began keeping the pantry full. It took time before Rachel believed food would still be there tomorrow. She expected rules to change without warning. Every question sounded like an accusation. "Where are you going?" meant we did not trust her. "What time will you be home?" meant we were searching for an excuse to lock her out. One night, she returned 2 hours after curfew. I was sitting on the porch in my work jacket. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. "I know," she said. "I'll get my stuff." "You'll get inside." She stared at me. "You're throwing me out." "No." "You're angry." "Yes." "What's the difference?" That question stayed with me. I stood slowly. My knees were stiff after a day spent pulling cable through a warehouse ceiling. "The difference is that you still have to face me tomorrow." Rachel looked as though she did not understand. "You're not sending me away?" "You're late. You're not disposable." She remained at the bottom of the steps. "Come inside, Rachel." Eventually, she did. Another time, She backed Margaret's Buick into a wooden post beside the garage. The taillight cracked. A deep scrape appeared along the rear panel. Rachel climbed from the car pale and shaking. "I'll pay for it." "You don't have any money." "Then I'll leave." Margaret looked at me. I could see tears forming in her eyes. Instead of crying, she handed me the toolbox. I handed Rachel a flashlight. "You're going to hold this while I remove the broken housing." She blinked. "You're not sending me back?" "You hit a post, Rachel. You didn't rob a bank. What happens after we fix it? You learn how to pay attention while backing up. That's all?" "That's enough." She held the flashlight while I worked. Her hands trembled for the first 10 minutes. Then they became steady. Rachel was suspended from school once after shoving a boy who made a joke about foster children. Margaret attended the meeting with the principal. On the drive home, Rachel pressed herself against the passenger door. "You can stop pretending now." "Pretending what?" Margaret asked. "That you want me." Margaret pulled into a pharmacy parking lot. She placed the car in park and turned toward her. "We are going to deal with what you did." Rachel stared straight ahead. "But we are not disposing of the person who did it." Rachel did not speak again during the drive. That evening, I noticed the black backpack was no longer beside her bed. She had placed it inside the closet. It may not sound significant. Margaret and I understood. For the first time, Rachel believed she might be staying. Brian was away at college then. When he came home, he never knew what to make of Rachel. He was not openly cruel. But he made comments. "Guess I'm not the only child anymore. You two spend a lot of time worrying about her. Does she really need that much help?" Margaret reminded him that love was not a pie. Giving someone else a piece did not make his smaller. I stayed mostly quiet. That was one of my mistakes. I told myself Brian would outgrow the jealousy. Fathers often tell themselves time will solve the conversations they are afraid to have. Time rarely solves them. It simply allows the resentment to become older. Rachel graduated from high school with average grades and perfect attendance during her final year. She decided to become a nurse. "Why nursing?" I asked. She answered without hesitation. "Because scared kids deserve at least one adult who doesn't leave the room." Financial aid covered most of her classes. Not all. I installed lighting during weekends at a strip mall. Margaret sold a bracelet she rarely wore. Rachel learned what we had done years later. She never forgot it. When she was 22 and working full-time at Dayton Children's Hospital, she asked us to meet her at the Montgomery County Courthouse. A clerk reviewed the adult adoption documents. Then she smiled. Most people complete an adoption when the child is much younger. Rachel looked at us. "I know the paperwork is late." She reached for Margaret's hand. "The family isn't." Margaret cried so hard that she had to sit down. I claimed there was dust in my eye. No one believed me. Now, more than 20 years later, Rachel was arranging the surgery that might preserve my sight. By 9 that morning, she had contacted the surgical center, confirmed the payment, and secured a Thursday appointment. "I can take a cab home," I said. "The clinic will not allow that." "Why?" "You need a responsible adult to sign you out and remain with you overnight." "I am a responsible adult." "Then start acting like one and stop arguing." I sent Brian a message. "Surgery is scheduled for Thursday." Rachel helped arrange it. The message showed as delivered. Brian never replied. Rachel picked me up before sunrise Thursday morning. The surgical center's waiting room was too cold and too bright. She sat beside me and read the consent papers aloud because the small print continued slipping out of focus. I signed where she pointed. When the nurse arrived to take me back, I removed my house key and placed it in Rachel's hand. "Keep this." She closed my fingers around it. "You gave me a key before I believed I belonged anywhere." Her eyes filled. "I'm not losing you now." As they wheeled me toward the operating room, the final face I could still recognize clearly was hers. When I opened my eyes, the world appeared washed in white. Not clear. Brighter. A nurse leaned over me. "How are you feeling, Mr. Bennett?" Like someone poured sand into my eye. She laughed. "That is a common review." A hard plastic shield covered my right eye. My throat was dry. My legs felt heavier than expected. "Your daughter is waiting." For one confused second, I pictured Margaret. Then reality returned. Rachel stood as soon as I entered recovery. "Well?" she asked. "I think I still look handsome." "You definitely still need better jokes." She squeezed my shoulder. The nurse explained the instructions. Eye drops 4 times each day. Nothing heavier than 10 pounds. Sleep on my left side. Wear the shield at night. Call immediately if severe pain or sudden flashes appeared. Rachel listened with the focus of someone accustomed to hospitals. I mostly watched her. When the nurse finished, she handed Rachel a folder. "You'll probably remember this better than he will." I usually do. The ride home was quiet. Not uncomfortable. Comfortable enough that silence did not need filling. As we turned onto my street, Rachel glanced over. "Are you hungry?" "A little. I made chicken noodle soup." "You planned ahead?" "I've met you before." At the house, she helped me settle into the recliner. She heated the soup. She placed large black labels on the eye drop bottles. Then she taped a schedule to the refrigerator. 8 in the morning. Noon. 4 in the afternoon. 8 at night. The numbers were large enough that I could almost read them through the haze. Almost. Rachel remained until nearly 10 that evening. She checked every bulb in the hallway. She placed bright blue tape along the basement step. She removed a loose rug from the kitchen. "You don't have to keep doing this." "I know. That rug has been there for 20 years. It has been trying to kill you for 20 years. It belonged to your mother. Mom would rather you remain upright." Before leaving, she kissed my forehead. "Good night, Dad." The house became quiet after the door closed. I had forgotten how loud loneliness could become. The first week after surgery moved slowly. Healing is rarely dramatic. It is repetitive. Drops. Timers. Short walks around the living room. Trying not to bend over. Trying not to rub an eye determined to itch. Rachel visited before work on some mornings. Other days, she stopped after 12-hour shifts. Sometimes she remained 15 minutes. Sometimes an hour. She never asked when I would repay her. She never mentioned the check. She checked the medication, stocked groceries, and made sure I had eaten. Then she returned to her own life. 5 days after surgery, Brian sent a text. "Hope the procedure went well. Things have been crazy here." I stared at the message. It was not cruel. That almost made it worse. It was empty. He did not ask whether I could see. He did not ask whether I needed help. He explained his absence instead of asking about my recovery. I typed 3 responses. I deleted all of them. In the end, I wrote nothing. 10 days after the procedure, the ophthalmologist removed the shield. He held up 3 fingers. "How many?" 3. "Good." The room appeared brighter than it had in months. Edges were returning. Letters were imperfect, but they no longer floated into one another. I could not drive yet. I could not lift anything heavy. But I was healing. For the first time in months, I believed I might remain independent. Rachel drove me home. After lunch, I said, "I need to find some paperwork." "What paperwork?" "Insurance. Investments. Your mother always knew where everything was." "I'll help." Margaret's writing desk stood in the corner of our bedroom. I had not opened the bottom drawer since the week after her funeral. Not because I could not. Because I was not ready. Rachel carried a small fireproof box to the dining table. I found the key taped beneath the drawer. Margaret hid spare keys in places only she could remember. Somehow, I still remembered that one. Inside the box were neatly labeled folders. House deed. Insurance policies. Retirement accounts. Tax returns. Margaret's handwriting remained steady on every label. Rachel lifted one envelope. "This says Walter only." I recognized the handwriting immediately. My chest tightened. "I'll read it later." Rachel started to hand it over. Then she stopped. "I think she would want you to read it now." She walked into the kitchen and gave me privacy. For several minutes, I only stared at the envelope. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. My dear Walter. If you are reading this, then I am no longer there to remind you that taking care of yourself is not selfish. You have spent your whole life believing love means quietly enduring everything. It does not. Love also means allowing people to carry you when your own legs become tired. And sometimes love means accepting that not everyone will choose to. Please do not divide what we built out of guilt. Make sure you are safe first. After that, leave what remains where you found loyalty, not where tradition tells you it belongs. I love you always. Margaret. I read the final 3 lines twice. Then a third time. Not because the words were blurry. Because they hurt. Margaret knew me better than anyone. She knew I would continue giving chances long after common sense told me to stop. She knew I confused sacrifice with duty and guilt with love. Rachel returned quietly. Are you okay? I folded the letter. I miss your mother. I know. She always understood what I needed before I did. Rachel smiled sadly. Apparently, she still does. The following Monday, I called Daniel Mercer. He had handled our estate planning for years. His office overlooked Courthouse Square in downtown Dayton. When I arrived 2 days later, he stood and shook my hand. Walter. Daniel. He looked at my eye. How is the recovery? Better each day. That is good. After several minutes of conversation, he opened a thick blue folder. Margaret was exceptionally organized. She always was. Daniel smiled. She also anticipated that one day you might need permission to place yourself first. I looked down at the documents. I've been thinking about Brian. I assumed you had. I don't want revenge. Good. I don't even want to punish him. What do you want? I answered before I could soften the truth. I never want to depend on someone who sees my survival as an inconvenience. The office became quiet. Daniel nodded. That is a healthier question. He spent nearly an hour explaining the trust in plain English. Margaret and I had established a revocable living trust years earlier. After her death, everything remained available for my care. I controlled the assets. I could change the beneficiaries. I could appoint a new healthcare representative. I could replace the person authorized to manage finances if I lost capacity. I frowned. Brian is listed for those. He is. The thought produced a chill. If my vision disappeared completely, Brian would control financial decisions. If I became confused or unable to communicate, he could influence medical care. For the first time since my diagnosis, blindness was no longer my greatest fear. I imagined Vanessa holding my checkbook while Brian decided whether another treatment was worth the cost. Daniel appeared to understand. You are not deciding who deserves money today. No? You are deciding who you trust with your life. The sentence settled over me like fresh concrete. Heavy. Permanent. I looked through the window toward the courthouse lawn. Cars moved through the intersection. People hurried toward lunch. The world continued. My life suddenly felt divided into before and after. Before the phone call. After the phone call. Before Rachel's check. After Margaret's letter. I think it is finally time I stopped confusing guilt with love. Daniel did not rush me. He asked careful questions. Did I understand the value of the estate? Yes. Was anyone pressuring me? No. Had Rachel asked to control any asset? Absolutely not. Was I angry with Brian? Yes. Daniel waited. But anger is not why I'm here. What is? I placed Margaret's letter beside the folder. If I am sick, confused, or lying in a hospital bed, I need the person making decisions to care more about me than the expense. That is a legitimate concern. We reviewed the estate. The house was worth more than I realized. Margaret and I had purchased it when much of the area consisted of cornfields and two-lane roads. The retirement accounts had grown steadily. There was Margaret's life insurance benefit. The investment portfolio. The small parcel of land. Together, the estate was worth approximately $1,150,000. It was not all cash. It was not money I could spend carelessly. But it explained why Brian became unusually interested whenever I mentioned updating documents. The original plan divided everything equally between Brian and Rachel. Brian was also named my financial power of attorney, healthcare representative, and successor trustee. Years earlier, that arrangement seemed logical. Brian worked in wealth management. He was my biological son. I assumed he would protect me. Now I heard Vanessa's voice. You should have planned for medical expenses. I had planned. My mistake was trusting the wrong person to carry out the plan. I want your firm to serve as successor trustee. That can be arranged. I want Rachel handling medical decisions if I cannot speak. We will need to ask whether she accepts. She will. Daniel smiled faintly. I suspect you are right. What about the distribution? I thought about Brian. 43 years of birthdays. Baseball games. School concerts. The first time I carried him through the front door. One terrible call could not erase an entire lifetime. But the call was not one isolated mistake. It exposed years of distance I had excused because facing the truth was painful. 35% to Brian. Daniel waited. 65% to Rachel. And the house. To Rachel, if I still own it. What about your care? First priority. A separate reserve would cover long-term care, home assistance, and medical needs. A modest donation would support a local organization assisting older adults with vision loss. Brian would still inherit a substantial amount. What he would not inherit was control over me. Daniel finished making notes. Would you like me to contact them before completing the changes? No. That may cause conflict. If I invite them before signing, it becomes a negotiation. And you do not want that? I want them to hear it from me. I looked at Margaret's letter. But I am no longer asking permission. 3 weeks later, we met inside Daniel's conference room. Brian and Vanessa arrived 10 minutes early. I could see them through the glass wall when I stepped from the elevator. Brian wore a navy suit with polished brown shoes. Vanessa had a leather folder open and tapped something with a silver pen. They looked prepared for a negotiation. Rachel arrived 4 minutes late wearing navy scrubs and carrying a paper cup of coffee. I'm sorry. We had a discharge problem on the pediatric floor. You're fine, Daniel said. She sat in the chair farthest from his desk. No folder. No legal pad. No questions about money. Brian stood and gave me an awkward hug. How is your eye? Improving. You should have told me the surgery was that serious. I looked at him. I did. His face tightened. You caught us at a bad time. Vanessa leaned forward. The property closing was extremely stressful, Walter. There were unexpected fees. Rachel stared into her coffee. I could tell she was trying not to react. Daniel opened the meeting. Walter asked you here because he has completed several amendments to his estate plan. Vanessa's pen moved toward the paper. Before discussing the details, I need to make one point clear. Daniel looked at Brian, then Vanessa. Walter underwent an independent competency evaluation. Vanessa's pen stopped. These decisions are lawful, voluntary, and already executed. Already executed? Brian asked. Yes. This meeting is informational. It is not a negotiation. The temperature in the room seemed to change. Daniel began with the positions of authority. Brian had been removed as financial power of attorney. Removed as healthcare representative. Removed as successor trustee. He stared at me. You put Rachel in charge of everything? No. I spoke calmly. Daniel's firm will handle finances if I become unable. Rachel will speak for my health care. Why? Because she has shown she can listen when I'm frightened. Rachel turned toward me. Dad, you didn't tell me. I know. I don't know whether I'm qualified. You're a nurse. That doesn't automatically. And you came when I needed you. Rachel looked uncomfortable. That discomfort was one of the reasons I trusted her. She did not want power. She understood the burden of it. Vanessa cleared her throat. What about the house and investments? There it was. Not my health. Not my safety. The estate. Daniel explained the distribution. 65% to Rachel. 35% to Brian. The house to Rachel, provided it remained in the trust. Rachel's face lost its color. No. Everyone looked at her. Dad, no. The decision is complete. I didn't give you money for this. I know. You cannot make it look like I did. I'm not. Then change it back. Vanessa released a sharp breath. Unbelievable. Brian turned toward her. What? I told you to call him after surgery. He stared at her. You are the one who took the phone. You let me because you didn't want to deal with it. Their voices began rising. I lifted one hand. She may have taken the telephone, Brian. He stopped. You allowed the call to end. He looked at me. For the first time that morning, he had no prepared response. I reached into my jacket. Rachel's envelope was inside. The check had been deposited. The note remained. I placed it on the table. She worked a 12-hour shift that day. Rachel shook her head. Dad, please. She has a mortgage, student loans, and a life of her own. I looked at Brian. She did not ask whether I could repay her. Rachel wiped her cheek. She did not know what I owned. She did not know there was a trust. She heard I was scared and came to my house. Brian leaned back. We didn't have $3,500 sitting around. You had enough money. That isn't fair. You had just purchased a vacation home. We were stretched thin. You were stretched between a second house and your father's eyesight. The room became completely silent. You made your choice. Brian's jaw tightened. I'm your son. Yes. Mom would never have wanted this. I unfolded Margaret's letter. My hands were steadier than I expected. I read one line. Leave what remains where you've found loyalty, not where tradition tells you it belongs. Brian looked away. Rachel covered her mouth. Daniel closed the folder. The amended documents will be formally distributed after the standard 72-hour administrative period. Brian stood. Delay it. Daniel remained seated. That is Walter's decision. Brian turned toward me. Dad? No. Vanessa snapped her folder closed. This is going to destroy the family. I stood slowly. The paperwork did not destroy anything. My voice remained calm. It only stopped pretending nothing had already changed. Brian and Vanessa left without saying goodbye. Through the glass wall, I watched them argue beside their black SUV. Rachel stood near me. As we reached the elevator, she offered her arm. I can see the curb now, I told her. I know. Then why are you still helping? She smiled. I'm still walking beside you. Exactly 72 hours later, someone began pounding on my front door hard enough to shake Margaret's photograph. It was shortly after 8 on Saturday morning. I sat in the kitchen with coffee and a newspaper. For the first time in months, I was reading without a magnifying glass. The pounding came again. Not a knock. A series of desperate blows against the old brass knocker Margaret had purchased at an antique shop. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Brian stood on the porch. He was not wearing his usual press suit. His shirt was wrinkled. The sleeves were rolled unevenly. His tie hung loose as though he had pulled it all night. His eyes were red. Not from drinking. From lack of sleep. Several sheets of paper were folded tightly in one hand. The trust documents. He saw me through the window. Dad? I opened the door but did not immediately step aside. Please, he said. Just let me explain. I moved. He entered slowly and looked around the house. Nothing had changed. Margaret's quilt remained on the couch. The grandfather clock continued ticking. Family photographs still lined the hallway. The difference was that now I could see the faces. I made coffee, I said. Brian nodded. Okay. We stood awkwardly for several seconds. Then I carried 2 mugs to the kitchen table. Brian sat across from me. For one moment, I saw the little boy who once asked whether pancakes counted as dinner. Then I looked at the legal papers in his hand. Reality returned. He placed them on the table. Dad, this has gotten completely out of control. I stirred my coffee. Has it? You changed everything because of one bad phone call. I looked at him. One phone call? You know what I mean. No, Brian. I honestly don't. He rubbed both hands over his face. We were under pressure. I know. The lake house closing was difficult. I know. The costs were more than expected. I know. He stopped. I waited. Which part was the bad moment? I asked. He frowned. What? Which part? I counted them slowly. Refusing to help? He looked down. Allowing your wife to shame me? His hands tightened. Or waiting 6 days after surgery to send an empty text? His shoulders dropped. I texted. You explained your absence. Silence. You never asked how I was. Brian swallowed. I thought Rachel had everything under control. There it is. What? The sentence. He looked confused. You believe somebody else was taking care of me. I watched the meaning settle into him. Older people speak about loneliness differently than younger people. Loneliness is not always having nobody around. Sometimes it is becoming invisible. Everyone assumes someone else called. Someone else visited. Someone else collected the medication. Someone else made sure the old man arrived home after surgery. Eventually, everybody assumes. Nobody actually knows. I didn't think about it that way, Brian said. I know. He stared into his coffee. I have replayed that phone call 100 times. So have I. I should have come over. Yes. I should have called. Yes. I should have helped. Yes. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I believed he meant it. But apologies become easier when consequences have already arrived. He took a breath. Vanessa was. I raised one finger. No. He stopped. She was stressed. So were you. She pushed me. You allowed yourself to be pushed. It was not entirely my fault. I held his eyes. She spoke the words. He nodded. You agreed with the silence that followed. His shoulders collapsed. There was nothing left to argue. After a while, Brian asked, Can I ask you something? You just did. Despite everything, he produced a tired smile. I deserve that. Probably. He unfolded the estate papers. I keep thinking there must be a way to fix this. I did not answer. I know I made a mistake. You did. I know Rachel deserves more respect than I gave her. She does. I know I hurt you. Yes. He looked directly at me. So what do I do? That question deserved an honest answer. You begin by understanding this is not about money. He waited. But the documents remain exactly as they are. His face fell. Then nothing changes. The paperwork does not change. So I've lost everything. No. I leaned forward. You still have your career. Your children. Your health. You still have 35% of an estate you did not earn. You have not lost everything. His eyes filled. You lost control. That truth struck harder. For years, Brian quietly assumed he would someday manage my finances, medical decisions, house, and property. We never discussed it. He believed that was simply how life worked. Father became old. Son took control. Property eventually transferred. Now it would not. After a long silence, he asked, if there had been no trust, would you have still changed things? I understood the real question. Brian. He looked at me. If there had been no trust, would you still be sitting here this morning? His lips parted. No words came. The clock ticked in the living room. A lawnmower started somewhere down the street. Brian lowered his head. I don't know. Thank you. He looked surprised. For what? For telling the truth. He wiped his eyes. I hate that I don't know. I know. I want to say yes. But you can't. No. That honesty mattered more than another polished apology. I reached into the drawer beside the table and removed Rachel's envelope. The cashier's check was gone. The note remained folded inside. I placed it between us. Brian opened it carefully. His eyes moved over Rachel's words. Then he read them again. She paid for the entire surgery? Yes. She never told me. No. Why? Because she was not trying to embarrass you. Brian remained quiet. I always thought she wanted to replace me. Nobody can replace a son. Hope appeared briefly in his face. But a son can abandon the responsibilities that come with being one. The hope faded. I don't know how to fix that. You don't fix it today. I carried our empty mugs to the sink. You repaired through 100 ordinary days. Brian listened. You call because you want to hear my voice? You visit without asking about attorneys. You show up when life is not dramatic. You stop treating family like an investment that deserves attention only when the numbers change. Behind me, I heard him crying. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Quietly enough that I understood something inside him had finally cracked. When I turned, he looked older than 43. I don't want the money anymore. I believe you. He blinked. You do? Yes. Then why won't you change it back? I returned to the table. Because if I do, neither of us will ever know whether you stayed for me. I placed my hand on Rachel's envelope. Or for what might still become yours. Brian closed his eyes. I understand. I hope one day you truly do. At the front door, he hesitated. Can I come back next weekend? I considered the question. You do not need permission to knock. He nodded. Then he looked toward Margaret's photograph. Can you see better? I followed his gaze. For the first time in months, I could see the gray blue of her eyes. Better than I have in years. Brian understood that I was not talking only about my eyesight. He walked down the driveway. I did not call him back. I did not feel victorious. There was no celebration. Only sadness. And relief. For the first time, I had stopped begging my son to become the man I hoped he already was. By early spring, I could see individual leaves on the maple tree across the street. That may not sound extraordinary. After months of seeing the world as shadows and shapes, it felt miraculous. I stood at the front window one morning holding coffee. Sunlight caught the edges of the branches. A robin hopped across the lawn. It stopped near the bird bath and tilted its head. I could see the red on its chest. I remained there longer than necessary. Simply because I could. At my next appointment, the ophthalmologist dimmed the lights and asked me to read the chart. E. Good. F. T. O. He adjusted the lens. How about now? L. P. He leaned back with a satisfied nod. You have made excellent progress, Mr. Bennett. Rachel sat beside me with her purse in her lap. She can stop driving me now. The doctor smiled. That is between you and your daughter. On the way home, I told Rachel she no longer needed to attend every appointment. I know. You have patience. I know. A job. I know. Your own life. I know. You are going to keep coming anyway. Yes. At a red light, she glanced at me. You're finally catching on. I laughed. For years, I thought independence meant never needing anyone. Age corrected that idea. Real independence is not doing everything alone. It is knowing that people helping you are not waiting for repayment. A week later, Rachel came for Sunday dinner. I made pot roast using Margaret's recipe card. For the first time since my eyesight began failing, I could read every word in her handwriting without holding the card beneath a lamp. Add onions after 1 hour. Margaret had underlined after twice because I always added them too early. Rachel found me smiling at the card. What? Your mother is still correcting me. She was usually right. Do not encourage her. We ate at the kitchen table. After dinner, Rachel helped clear the plates. Then she sat down again. I want to discuss the trust. What about it? I still don't want 65%. I know. It's too much. That depends on what remains. You know what I mean. She looked genuinely troubled. Not excited. Not calculating. Troubled. The trust pays for my care first, I explained. Home assistance, medical expenses, whatever I need. You do not receive anything until I'm gone. That isn't the point. What is? I don't want you believing I helped because of this. I don't. I don't want Brian believing it. He may. That bothers me. I know. I reached across the table. You gave me the check when you thought I was a retired electrician with a bad eye and an old house. Rachel smiled faintly. That is exactly what you are. Correct. This decision is not payment for one check. I reminded her of the years behind it. She remained beside Margaret through chemotherapy. She checked on me after the funeral. She remembered anniversaries everyone else avoided mentioning. She arrived on ordinary Sundays when there was no emergency and nothing to gain. I am leaving this house to someone who understands why it matters. Rachel looked around the kitchen. The worn cabinets. The clock. Margaret's recipe box. Only if your care comes first. It does. And Daniel's firm still controls finances if you cannot? Yes. She squeezed my hand. Then I'll stop arguing. That will be a first. She threw the dish towel at me. Brian's return was slower. That was probably a good thing. The first Sunday after our conversation, he called at 7. I allowed it to go to voicemail. His message was simple. Hi, Dad. Just checking in. You don't need to call back if you don't feel like it. The following Sunday, he called again. That time, I answered. We spoke for 6 minutes. Weather. Work. His daughter's science project. He never mentioned the trust. 2 weeks later, he offered to drive me to an appointment. Rachel already has it covered. Okay. No sigh. No guilt. No complaint. Only okay. A month later, Brian arrived carrying 2 coffees. He noticed the fence leaning along the backyard. That post is rotting. I know. Do you want me to fix it? Do you know how? He looked offended. You taught me. I taught you to hold a flashlight and complain. He smiled. Some things take longer to learn. The following Saturday, he returned wearing jeans and an old sweatshirt. He brought a post hole digger, a level, and the wrong concrete mix. I did not correct him immediately. Some lessons deserve time. He worked nearly an hour before removing the rusted post. His hands became dirty. Sweat gathered at his hairline despite the cool air. I sat on the porch steps and watched. Eventually, he leaned against the fence. I've been thinking about what you said. That sounds dangerous. He gave a tired laugh. I spent years believing success meant never needing anyone. I waited. Somewhere along the way, I started treating anyone who needed me like they had failed. The yard was quiet except for a sprinkler 2 houses away. I made you feel small. Yes. I'm sorry. I know. I believed him. Believing an apology and restoring trust are not the same thing. He looked at the fence. Do you think things can ever go back? No. His face tightened. I stood and picked up the 2 coffee mugs. But that does not mean they cannot move forward. He accepted his mug. We drank in silence. Then I pointed toward the new post. It's leaning. He frowned. It's straight. Get the level. Dad. Get the level. Brian shook his head. But he was smiling when he reached for it. Growing old brings losses no one prepares you for. Strength. Speed. Friends. A spouse. Sometimes health. Sometimes the belief that you can handle whatever arrives next. But the deepest pain is not always physical. Sometimes it is discovering that the people you carried for decades no longer notice when you begin to stumble. I learned something else. Forgiveness does not require returning the same power someone once misused. Boundaries are not cruelty. Love can leave the door unlocked without surrendering the entire house. Rachel's envelope remains inside Margaret's desk beside her final letter. One reminds me of the love Margaret and I gave. The other reminds me that real love often finds its way back. Brian and I are still repairing what broke. Some weeks, we make progress. Some weeks, we drink coffee and argue about whether a fence post is straight. He has never asked me to change the trust again. He calls without discussing money. He visits without inspecting the house. Sometimes he sits at the kitchen table and tells me about work. Sometimes we talk about Margaret. Sometimes neither of us says much. Silence feels different when 2 people have chosen to remain. I do not know what will happen years from now. I do not know whether Brian and I will completely rebuild what was lost. Some damage leaves a mark even after it has healed. But now, when he knocks on my front door, I know he is not there because of what he might inherit. He is there because I am still his father. Rachel still comes to appointments she insists I should not attend alone. She still checks the dates on my medication. She still moves rugs she considers dangerous. And every time she calls me Dad, I remember that family is not measured only by blood. Family is measured by who answers when you are frightened. Who arrives before being asked twice. Who remains after the emergency has passed. The $3,500 did more than save my eyesight. It revealed what I had been refusing to see. Brian loved me. But for years, his love had become lazy. It rested on the assumption that I would always be available and would never need anything in return. Rachel's love was active. It showed up in soup, cashier's checks, labeled medication bottles, and long drives after exhausting shifts. I did not change my estate to reward one child and punish another. I changed it to protect myself. And to place responsibility in the hands of someone who had demonstrated she understood its weight. For most of my life, I thought being a father meant giving until there was nothing left to give. I thought love meant hiding disappointment. Covering debts. Forgiving silence. Removing every consequence before it reached your child. Margaret understood something I had missed. Sometimes continuing to rescue someone prevents them from becoming capable of rescue. Sometimes the most loving word is no. Sometimes a boundary is the only thing strong enough to reveal whether a relationship is real. Brian came back after the paperwork was finished. At first, he came because he was afraid of what he had lost. Then he continued coming after realizing the money would not return. That was when the real repair began. One evening, nearly a year after the surgery, Brian and Rachel were both at the house. Rachel brought dessert. Brian repaired the light above the back steps. For years, the two of them had occupied separate corners of the family. That evening, they stood together in the kitchen arguing about whether Margaret's pie recipe required cinnamon. "It says cinnamon," Brian insisted. "It says optional." "Mom never considered cinnamon optional. You barely helped her cook." I ate the evidence. Rachel laughed. For a brief moment, the house sounded the way it had when Margaret was alive. Not exactly the same. Nothing can return exactly as it was. But warm. Full. Alive. I looked at the photograph above the fireplace. Margaret's eyes were clear now. Gray-blue. Just as I remembered. "I finally understand," I whispered. Rachel looked over. "What did you say?" "Nothing." Brian carried the pie toward the table. "Are you talking to Mom again?" "Sometimes she is the only person here who makes sense." Rachel smiled. She would agree. If someone remained beside you when life became frightening, remember them. Not only during emergencies. Remember the ordinary days they gave you. The quiet calls. The meals. The rides. The moments when they made room for your fear without making you feel weak. Dependable love rarely arrives with dramatic speeches. Sometimes it arrives in navy scrubs carrying soup. Sometimes it leaves a cashier's check inside an envelope and walks away before you can refuse it. Sometimes it returns with 2 coffees and a post-hole digger, ready to repair a crooked fence. Love does not always look perfect. But when it is real, it shows up. I needed $3,500 to protect my eyesight. My biological son told me he could not spare a dime. My adopted daughter gave me everything I needed without asking what she would receive. That difference forced me to make the hardest decision of my life. I removed control from the person tradition said should receive it. I gave trust to the person whose actions had earned it. Brian believed the changed documents meant I had stopped loving him. They meant the opposite. I loved him enough to stop protecting him from the truth about the man he had become. And I loved myself enough to make sure my final years would not be controlled by someone who considered my needs an inconvenience. Today, I can read the newspaper. I can drive during daylight. I can see the robin on the lawn and the individual leaves on the maple tree. Most importantly, I can see my family clearly. Not as I hoped they would be. As they truly are. Rachel is my daughter because she chose to stay long before any judge signed a document. Brian is my son not because he was perfect, but because he finally began doing the difficult work of returning. Margaret remains part of this house through every lesson she left behind. And I am no longer ashamed to need people. I simply choose more carefully who I allow to carry me. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean surrendering your safety. It does not require you to hand someone the keys to the same door they once abandoned. Forgiveness can say, "I still love you. But the boundary remains. You may return to my life. But you must return through your actions." That is where Brian and I are now. Moving forward. Not backward. Not pretending. Repairing one ordinary day at a time. Sometimes, when evening light enters the living room, it falls across Margaret's photograph. Her eyes seem brighter. Her smile still carries the same amused patience. I sit beneath the picture and unfold her letter. I always return to the same line. "Leave what remains where you've found loyalty." I once believed she meant only money. Now I know she meant something larger. Leave your time where you found loyalty. Leave your trust there. Leave your tenderness. Leave your remaining years with people who care whether you can see the sunrise. People who do not calculate the cost of keeping you alive. People who show up. The surgery saved my eyesight. Rachel's kindness saved my dignity. Margaret's letter saved me from guilt. And Brian's consequences may have saved the relationship between us. Nothing returned to the way it had been. But something more honest began in its place. When Brian knocks now, I open the door. Not because I have forgotten. Because he continues returning even though the documents remain unchanged. He is learning that family is not guaranteed by blood or secured through inheritance. It is renewed through presence. Through humility. Through 100 small choices to remain. For now, that is enough. And after everything, enough feels like a beautiful thing.